Over the past 2 months, relations between China and the U.S. have been a mix of cooperation and tension. Trade relations remain strained because U.S. maintains tariffs on Chinese goods, and U.S. trade deficit grows every month. In the coverage of recent U.S. Navy aircraft flight through Taiwan Strait, Ground News has analyzed 30 sources. Surprisingly, 39% of these sources have showed a left-leaning bias, whereas 13% show a right-leaning bias. So this coverage highlights the complexity of the geopolitical tension in the region. I'm able to do this deep dive into this topic thanks to our sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is an essential tool that provides me insights into how news stories are covered worldwide. With every story, Ground News offers comprehensive breakdowns of political bias, factuality, and ownership of the reporting sources, all supported by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. In today's media, where landscapes and narratives can be skewed or misrepresented, it's crucial to separate the facts from the noise. Ground News empowers me with transparent information, allowing me to make informed decisions about events shaping our world. Notably, 28% of the sources reporting on this issue are owned by wealthy private owners, which emphasizes the need to diverse perspectives, even in terms of global naval news. One feature I find valuable in Ground News is Blind Spot Feed, which highlights stories disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. This enables you to broaden your understanding by exploring perspectives that may be overlooked elsewhere. Personally, I rely on Ground News to gain a comprehensive understanding of the news stories with various sources and perspectives. It's an invaluable tool for navigating today's media landscape with clarity and insight. To access the same level of insight analysis, visit ground.news/subbrief or simply use the link in the description to sign up today. By signing up through my link, you'll receive an exclusive 40% discount on Vantage Plan, which provides unlimited access to all features. You can also scan the QR code on the screen to gain access to Vantage Plan. I believe Ground News is doing essential work in promoting media transparency, and I encourage you to check them out as well. So the U.S. Navy flies aircraft through Taiwan Strait a day after U.S. and China defense chiefs hold rare talks. That's right, that's Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin conducted his first direct meeting, official meeting, with his counterpart in the Chinese military, Admiral Dong Jun. They discussed things like freedom of navigation, international law in the seas, which is a big point of discussion between China and the United States, but also the Taiwan Relations Act and the 6 assurances. 2 days after the direct contact between the two leaders of the 2 largest navies in the world, the United States Navy sent this P-8A Poseidon through the Taiwan Strait as a demonstration that we will perform the duties that we say we're going to do in terms of freedom of navigation and respecting the international law on the seas. So peaceful transfer or movement of military ships, aircraft through international airspace and international waters is completely legal in accordance with the international law on the seas. And this has been a point of contention, especially in the South China Sea, where every time America operates in the Strait of Taiwan or Taiwan Strait, they seem to punish things like Philippine fishermen with their Chinese militia navy that they have all around the world, but especially strong in the South China Sea there. International airspace really is a point of contention in some countries around the world when that international airspace is off their shores. And 2 nations that come to mind right away is Russia and China. Anytime the United States operates in international airspace but near their shores, they seem to have a problem with it. And they say that we're instigating or raising tensions when in reality, we're just exercising our right of lawful passage is what we're doing. So my point is the international airspace all around the world is the same. Everyone has the same rules and can operate the same way if they follow those rules, whether that airspace is off the coast of Italy or the United States. If China and Russia wanted to operate MPA like the P-8A Poseidon here, but their version of it, between, say, Florida and Cuba, which would be completely reasonable for them to do since they have both those countries have improving relations with Cuba right now, they could operate their MPA, Maritime Patrol Aircraft, in the Florida Straits. As long as they're in international airspace and they're doing a peaceful transit, that is completely legal. And that's exactly what we're doing here. And you see in this video provided by the DoD of a P-8A Poseidon flying through the Taiwan Strait. So it goes both ways. And the American point of view is, you can come over here and do it as you will. Therefore, we're going to do it where we want to. And that includes areas like the Middle East, and in this case, Taiwan Strait. But let's come back home, because while the Navy and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is doing a great job, things are not all well back here in the United States. Let's go to May 1st, 2024, when the House lawmakers came together to hold hearings to discuss concerns about only building one Virginia-class submarine in fiscal year 2025 shipbuild plan. Congress has heard testimony from the Chief of Naval Operations year over year, going back over 10 years now, saying that we have 3 shipbuilding plans. They all include submarines that require 2 submarines per year to be built. And lately, for the past at least 6 to 8 years, we've been producing about 1.3 submarines per year, not reaching that 2-year level that in one hearing, the Chief of Naval Operations says that we need to build. And then in separate hearings, like this budgetary hearing, or whenever the Navy proposes next year's shipbuilding budget, it only includes 1 submarine. So why is the same Navy giving Congress 2 different recommendations? And the point is, according to Assistant Secretary of the Navy Research Development Acquisitions, testified that we should use those funds instead of saving them, because that's ridiculous, right? We don't save funds in Washington, we spend the funds. Instead of spending funds on a second submarine that we can't build anyway, there's no shipyard right now available, and that's a key word, availability, to do it. We should take that money and fund procurement of additional or R&D on better systems that will then go onto the submarines we actually are building and have shipyard space to build. And he cited things like supply chain issues, production instability, lack of skilled workforce on the waterfront, the same excuses we've been hearing for years that Congress has been trying to work with and solve for years, still come up every single year when they have this discussion. It's like Groundhog Day in the Congress, because the Navy says they need 2 submarines a year minimum to meet the shipbuilding plan of 2040, which I think now is 2050. So it's always a 30-year plan. And they're not building those submarines. And now they're not even requesting money to meet the plan that the Navy proposed to Congress, but in a different hearing. So they're trying to square the circle here on figuring out why we can't build more than 1.3 submarines a year. And the answer is we simply don't have the workforce or the shipyard. We don't have either one of those things to build 2 submarines a year, no matter what the excuses are. In the same hearing, shifting from the submarines to the surface warfare community, Congress asked for an update on the Constellation class frigate. The update is it's 3 years behind. NAVSEA Systems, which is part of the Navy, and this is Assistant Secretary of the Navy here represents, has sent teams of subcontractors to Finnicateri Marionette Marine up in Wisconsin to assess the situation as to why it's taking 3 years, or why are we 3 years behind on a ship that should have been, finished by now. And what's causing all that, and also to help them get back on schedule as best they can. And unless you have a time machine, you're not going to get 3 years back. But if they can finish it this year, it certainly won't go into 4 years being delayed. And when pressed as to how this could have possibly happened, why are we 3 years into this thing being delayed, and we're now sending subcontractors at God knows what expense to go to the shipyard and assess the situation? The answer was, from Assistant Secretary Gurton, quote, "We could have kept a better eye on this ship," end quote. And yeah, you could, Matter of fact, it's your job to do that. NAVC specifically works with the shipbuilders to hold them accountable to the shipbuilding plan that they propose and then win bids on to build these ships. And then after they get awarded these ships, it's like they've got the money now, they've got the contract, they kind of don't care about the schedule anymore, which is why we have NAVC Systems Command to work with the shipyards and keep them accountable and keep them on schedule. And the person representing the research, development, and acquisition of that arm is this gentleman right here, Nicholas Gerton. And he's saying things like, well, we've moved hard on that problem, referring to the Constellation class frigate being 3 years behind, quote, to get to a better place. He's referring to the additional workforce, the additional subcontractors sent to the shipyard recently to assess and improve and complete Hull 1 of this ship, as soon as it can be done. My point is, this is not a new problem. This has been going on year after year, assistant secretary after assistant secretary. Let's just go back to his predecessor. Just a couple of years ago in 2022, the same position, testifying before Congress representing the Navy and specifically NAVC Systems Command when it comes to shipbuilding, part of the Navy, Mr. J. Stefani told the House Armed Services Committee specifically, who funds these types of budgets, says, quote, we're looking at 1.5 to 2 billion further investment by ourselves plus industry and an increase in the workforce that would be necessary over a period of time to get to the state, end quote, of 2 submarines a year being produced, was what they were talking about. So even back then, he identified the problem, the same problem that's been identified every time they have these hearings. And it doesn't get resolved by spending another $1.5 to $2 billion, as Mr. Stefani suggested, which Congress did. They wrote an additional check on top of the shipbuilding budget and the Navy budget. They had a shipyard investment bill that got approved, and multiple billions of dollars were pushed into these shipyards for workforce recruitment, training, improving facilities, building new dry docks. That's what that money's going for. But what has the effect been? Here we are years later, we're still sitting at 1.3 submarines per year, which is the same build that we saw before the pandemic, so you can't blame that. You can blame the supply chain all you want and the workforce, but the reality is that we had these problems before 2020, and throwing billions of dollars doesn't seem to improve it. You need to identify how you're going to change this process, and I'll do that at the end of the video. Let's take a little moment and let's talk about why this is so important. It's not just us. We have an agreement with the United Kingdom and Australia. It's called the AUKUS agreement. It's a trilateral security agreement. The U.S. has promised to sell, maybe for $1, but we're going to sell 3 Virginia-class submarines that are already built, probably Block 3. So these are not new constructions. These have been around the block a little bit. 3 to 5 to Australia in the 2030s. In that decade of 2030s, between 2030 and 2040, we're going to sell 3 to 5 submarines to them. If we're only building 1.3 submarines per year, that's going to mean we're essentially staying status quo for those 3 years. If it takes 3 years to build 4 submarines and we sell, say, 4 instead of 5 to them, for those 3 years, we're not adding submarines to our fleet. We're just replacing used submarines that we're selling to Australia with new Block 5s that are going to be coming out in that time frame. So the multi-billion-dollar investment plan that happened in 2023 has not improved submarine production in any measurable way right now. And the situation is actually much worse than just these 2 systems. I'm sorry for pounding my desk. I am calm. I'm not calm, but it's fine. Let's begin. Every single major warship and submarine operations shipbuilding program is behind by years. Let's start with USS Columbia, a fantastic ballistic missile submarine. The technology is mind-blowing. I really hope that it's built so that I can maybe get a tour of it at some point. It's built in my lifetime. But right now, this ballistic missile submarine, the first of its class, which always has problems, is built by General Dynamics Electric Boat and Huntington Ingalls. Huntington Ingalls. Let me try that again. And they're projected to be between 12 and 16 months late on building this first one. The fourth and fifth blocks of Virginia-class submarines, which, by the way, is not a new design. The fifth block adds a couple of VLS cells to the mid of it, but it's not a complete new class of submarine. Anyway, those are behind by 36 months. Ladies and gentlemen, the same with the Constellation frigate that we just talked about up in Finnegan Marine, Marriott Marine is 36 months behind. And the big one, the next future aircraft carrier Enterprise, CVN 80, built by Huntington Ingalls, is 26 months late. It's so late, it doesn't even look like a ship right now. It's still a pile of metal at the bottom of one of their major dry docks. As every ship begins, it's still there, though. It's 36 months behind. And what are the causes? What does the Assistant Secretary of the Navy Research Development Acquisition say the problems are? Manpower, supply chain, and we still haven't seen any results despite additional funding given to them. So I agree with the Assistant Secretary. We could have kept a better eye on this ship. He could apply that not just to the Constellation class, but to every single shipbuilding project we have right now in the United States. Every single one of them applies to that. And so my point is, and here we get to it, I'm not here just to bitch. I'm going to do something that NAVSEA in front of Congress has not been able to do. Either Congress hasn't asked the question, or NAVSEA or in the Navy hasn't answered the question, is who is responsible for this? The answer is NAVSEA is, but they are not elected officials. Mr. Girton is as capable as a person he may be. He simply is not getting the job done. And to his credit, he was not in the position he was in when the Constellation frigate project was approved. That's not his doing. That was a previous Assistant Secretary to the Navy. My point is there's no accountability to the people approving these build contracts today for whenever they go off the rails and are 3 years late down the line. They've moved on to another position, and it kind of doesn't matter because they're not elected officials anyway. We can't replace them. And if you could replace Mr. Girton here, who would you replace him with? Who can get the job done? My point is, this is not a personnel problem. This really isn't even a position problem by itself. It is a systemic problem. It's a problem with the system in that NAVSEA apparently does not have, or is unable to use, if it does have, the tools necessary to keep the shipyards accountable to the budget builds, the budgets that they propose, and the builds and the contracts they get awarded to stick to that schedule and stick to that budget. For years now, project after project, whether it's an aircraft carrier or a ballistic missile submarine, the ship builders simply know they need to get the contract. The way to get the contract is to propose a ridiculously short build cycle at a underfunded level by millions, if not billions of dollars when talking about these larger systems, just to get that contract. And then once they have the contract, then they've got the government right where they want them. Because what are they going to do 2 years into the build of the next generation ballistic missile submarine, and they've run out of money. And they don't have the workforce, and they're 36 months behind. What are you going to do now, Congress? Are you going to find another shipyard? Where? Who else is going to build the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine? Naval Group over in France? I'm sure they would do it. They would charge an arm and a leg, and it would take twice as long. You're not going to get your submarine on schedule and on budget. Who else could do it? Well, you have BAE. You could go over to UK, do it over there. At least they'd give you a better deal. It'd still be late and over budget. It doesn't fix the problem. Ironically, one of the only countries in the world that has shipyard availability, not only to build 2 or 3 Virginia classes a year and stay a little bit closer to the schedule, is China. There's no way we're building our next generation anything that's related to the Navy in China, of course. So what we need to do here, and this is, I think, part of the solution, is to give NAVSEA, Systems Command, Secretary of the Navy in general, the legal tools that they need to hold these shipyards accountable. And when the shipyards are not accountable to their own bid, then they get penalized. Yeah, you fund the ship and the submarine to get it done, and then afterwards, you take it out of them. You find a way to punish them for this behavior, because this behavior has snowballed now for decades. This is not a new problem. We didn't wake up one day and have this industrial military complex problem. This goes all the way back to like the end of World War II, I think is where it began. And it's gotten to the point now where it's laughable. It's ridiculous in that the NAVC, the people on the government side that are supposed to hold the civilian side of the military industry accountable, can't do it, or they won't do it. One of those is the truth. And Congress, the only tool they have is a checkbook. All they can do is throw more money at the problem, hire more people, build more dry docks. But that doesn't solve the problem, apparently. It hasn't yet anyway. And what are the shipyards doing? Well, their stock is doing pretty well. Their shareholders are pretty damn happy. They're cashing the checks and making excuses, blaming things like the pandemic, like supply chains. And there's some truth in that. A supply chain issue is a supply chain issue, regardless of what year you're in. The fact is that they're not solving it. They're not doing anything that ends in a result that is measurable, that builds these ships and submarines, faster. So it's a complex problem, and I do have some sympathy really for the representatives of the Navy. I'm not here to bash on the Navy or anything like that. I just think that they need the tools to hold the shipyards accountable. Let's start with that. And that starts in Congress, and that's well above my pay grade. Good luck figuring it out. But I'm trying to push you guys in the right direction. These are the questions and answers, more importantly, the answers you need to get from NAVC. What does NAVC need? And then, you know what? I would call in every single CEO from every one of these shipyard companies and find out what's going on their end, and be cordial about it. Find out what they need. And then, of course, give it to them, but hold them accountable. And I swear to God, the next shipbuild contract that comes out, whatever that is, it had better be scrutinized. You'd better hold these builders accountable before you approve the contract to how they're going to meet the milestones that they're promising. Find that out. Okay? Man. Whew. Thanks to Ground News for supporting this nonsense. I'm not sure quite what this was, but go to ground.news/subbrief and use the link in the description. You can save 40% off your Vantage plan. And thanks again to Ground News for repeatedly coming back and funding this. I do honestly appreciate it. Those are good people over there. And worth your time. Check them out. Click the link. Also, if you want to find out more about these complex systems that we can't seem to build anymore, I know all about them. I'm telling you about them right here in this Blackboard series. Click this video. Thanks.